Okay, so tonight what I want to talk about, briefly, is Judah. Now, Judah isn't actually a man that we're told all that much about. I mean, we're not even introduced to him until he's mid to late 20s at the earliest, and before that, the only thing we know is that he's fourth son of Leah after Reuben, Simeon, and Levi. And we know nothing really about him up until, as I said, basically he's 30. And he just appears on the scene and then disappears again. And we only get a really brief cameo of Judah's life, but it's really quite an interesting one. And so we're introduced to Judah basically after Joseph has already had a really, really bad day. Joseph at this point has already been thrown into the pit by his brothers and left to rot. And then it's Judah who stands up and says to his brothers, hang on a minute, why have we just put him in a pit? Like, there are people over there that we could sell him to. We could actually get something from it as opposed to a bad smell. So what they do is they think, yeah, it's a good idea, and they sell him, and it's Judah that does that. And what's even more interesting is if you remember that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were all really, really rich. Joseph was sold for 20 pieces of silver. Once you divide that by the 10 brothers, 2 pieces of silver each, which, as far as I can tell, wouldn't have amounted to Judah as much more than pocket money. And so the introduction we have to the man Judah is a person who quite happily looks at his brother and says, ooh, yeah, he'd be worth a bit. I mean, not much, but some. And that's Judah, that's her introduction. And then that takes place at the end of Genesis chapter 37. The last little bit of it, they tell a great big whopper to their father about what happened to Joseph. There's 2 verses about Joseph being sold into Egypt, and then that's the end of Genesis chapter 37. And then in Genesis chapter 38, what we have is, it kind of skips over a couple of bits because it starts off with Judah having already left. At some point in between the end of 37, beginning of 38, Judah has looked at his family, looked at his God and said, no, thank you, I'm not interested. And he's turned around, he's just walked off. And he's just walked off into the land of Canaan, find a wife, so he's found a woman and he's gotten married. And he never had any intention of going back. That was it. As far as he was concerned, they were history. And you can see that as the first few verses of Genesis 38, not only does he get married, but he has kids. And when those kids, the eldest is fully grown, gets married, Judah's still there. He's still in Canaan, still, I imagine, quite happy with where he was. Not interested in anything that God had to offer him. And so his eldest son, he gets married to a woman called Tamar. And he angered God so much that God killed him. And all of a sudden, Judah has a bit of a problem. His eldest son's dead, and his daughter-in-law is now a widow. And so he does the thing that he's supposed to do. He gives his second son to get married to his daughter-in-law to continue the line of his firstborn, as you're supposed to do. And then his second son displeases God so much that God kills him. And now Judah really has a big problem because in the space of a matter of weeks, he's lost both his sons. Well, at least 2 of 3. And now he's faced with another problem because he's supposed to give his third son to marry Tamar. And you can almost see in the passage, you can almost see him thinking, now my first son married Tamar, he died. Second son married Tamar, he died. Third son, no, I don't want to do that. I want my son to be alive, thank you very much. And so what he does is he just sweeps the problem under the carpet. He just says to Tamar, look, no, sorry, my son's not old enough. No, he can't get married. Just go home, and when he's old enough, I'll give him to you to get married. He never meant to. He had no intention of ever doing that. He just didn't want to face the problem. The problem that he'd raised some rotten kids, and they kept on displeasing God. But no, he wasn't going to face that. And so then his wife dies at a later point. We don't know how much time happens between these events, but Judah's wife dies. And so after some more time, he goes off to shear his sheep. And on the way back from work, he sees a harlot, and he lies with her, as you do on the way home from work. And after he's lied with her, he's like, bother, I'm sorry, I forgot my wallet. Terribly sorry, I'll have to go home, get some money, come back, and then I can pay you. And she's like, yeah, okay, that's fine. But leave some security with it. He says, okay, I'll give you my staff and the ring. So he gives her a staff and the ring. He goes home, he gets the stuff, he comes back, and she's gone. And he's like, bother, this is a bit of a problem. And so he asks some discreet questions. Sort of like, have you seen that harlot woman that's normally over there? And they're like, what harlot woman? Don't know what you're talking about. And he's like, oh dear. And he asks for a while, and he gives up and goes home. What else can you do? She's gone. She obviously doesn't want it. Stuff in a ring, whatever. And then I don't think he thought much more about it for about 3 months, until someone runs to his door and says, Judah, your daughter-in-law, she's committed harlotry and she's with child. And Judah goes, right, burn her. And so Tamar gets dragged up in front of all these people. She's about to get burned, and then she says, hang on a minute, sorry, before I die, the dad owns this staff and this ring. And Judah goes, oh dear, because that's his staff and that's his ring. And now Judah gets faced with the biggest problem he's had so far. But I think in that problem, in that moment, is the most important moment of Judah's life. Because the thing he says to Tamar is truly, you are more righteous than I. And this is a man of the family of Abraham saying this to a Canaanite woman who's just committed harlotry. And what I think has happened is in that moment, all of Judah's life has just flashed before his eyes. And he's realized just how badly he's gone wrong. And so Tamar is saved. Judah acknowledges his mistake. And then that's basically the end of it. And that's basically the end of Genesis chapter 38. And then Judah just drops from the record. He's gone. And we go back to following the life of Joseph. We go through his sold into Egypt in Potiphar's house, raised up and then cast into prison, then raised out of prison. And we follow through all of Joseph's life until we get to the first year of the famine, after the 7 years of plenty. And then we cut back to Jacob's family. And there's Judah, who's gone home. And so with his brothers again, he goes out. And this time they go down to Egypt. They need to get food. So they go down to Egypt. They get food. But then there's the whole problem with Simeon. And Simeon gets left behind. And they come back. But they can come back with the proviso that they're not allowed to go back again to get more food unless they take Benjamin with them. And so they try and spread out the food as much as they can. They stretch it out as far as they can until they get to the point where, look, we have to go back to get more food. And so it's Reuben, the firstborn, who steps up and goes to his dad and says, look, Dad, we have a problem. We need food. Can we take Benjamin down? Now, remember, if anything happens to Benjamin, it's fine. Just, you can kill my kids. Like, that's going to work. What dad, having just lost his son, immediately goes, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to kill my grandkids. I have no idea what was going through Reuben's head at the time. To be honest, I don't even know if there was anything going through Reuben's head at the time. And funnily enough, Jacob's answer was, no, you can't take Benjamin. And so they're back to square one again. And so some more time passes. They're really desperate for food now. And it's Judah who steps up and tries again. And he says to his dad, look, we need to take Benjamin, but if anything happens to him, don't kill my third son. Don't do anything to him. If anything happens, blame me. And Jacob reluctantly agrees. And so off they go. They go down to Egypt, and they arrive in Egypt. And they're reunited with Simeon. Everything's going really well. They get a lovely dinner laid out for them, and they're seated in birth order, which is a bit odd. And then Benjamin gets 5 times more than everyone else. And Benjamin gets treated way better than everyone else for all the time they're there. And then they get given their food, given their gold, and then they go. And then a few hours later, after they've gone, some soldiers run up to them and they say, stop, one of you is a thief. And when we find him, we're going to take him as a slave back to Egypt, and he's going to be a slave for the rest of his life. And all of a sudden, there's a sort of a ringing bell, an echo, back to what it must have been like in Jacob's house 20-some years ago, when Joseph had been treated so much better than all of his brothers, and all of a sudden they were given the choice to sell their brother into slavery. But this time, though, they don't. And what's really interesting is that it doesn't just say that the brothers go back to Egypt with Benjamin. It says that Judah and his brethren go back. Judah, the man who originally started, who first sold his brother into slavery, he was the genesis of the idea. He was the man that was leading his brothers back to Egypt to make sure that they didn't sell their brother into slavery. And so they get there. They go up to Joseph, and it's Judah again who goes to the front, and he goes to Joseph and he says, look, you can't take Benjamin. Please don't. Look, if you take Benjamin, our dad's going to die. Like, he is not going to survive the shock at all. Please don't take Benjamin. Take me instead. And Joseph is overcome, sends the Egyptians out of the room, and reveals himself to his brothers. And there ends the story of Judah. He just disappears from the record. That's it. He's gone. But that story, however brief it is, I think is really quite interesting. And I suppose it does lead to the question, why at a conference launch on Joseph did I decide to choose to talk about Judah? And the reason is that Joseph is the type of Christ. Everything in his life marries up beautifully with the life of Christ, from being rejected by his family to saving his family. Everything that he does from beginning to end lines up so perfectly with Christ. And all that we have recorded of Joseph, he never sins. Just like Christ in all his life never sinned. And so I look at Joseph. I look at this man that I'm supposed to emulate because he is a type of Christ. But I can't do it. Because all I see when I look at all the things that Joseph overcame is me in those same situations, failing them again and again and again. And I just can't bring myself to look at Joseph and to try and compare myself with it, because I just don't do it. The man I find myself comparing to is Judah. Because there is a man I can see a lot of myself in, a lot of the bit that I don't like to talk about. All of the times when I mess up over and over again. I can see that in Judah. I can connect with him because he's as sinful and as fallible as I am. And you can see it right there. But what I think makes it the most interesting is, what makes it so special for me is that Judah, despite all of what he did, effectively being a type of us, a type of me and you, because he does sin like we do, and it's right there, it's all throughout his story, all the times he messes up. What makes it so special is that he managed to turn his life around. And this is a man who started out by selling his brother into slavery. As starts go, that's not good. And you think, okay, he can't get worse than this. And then he does. And then he's just like, family, God, yeah, no, not interested. And he doesn't just slightly go off the path. He's just like, right, gone. He just completely, no interest in coming back at all, just walks off, marries a Canaanite, brings up some of the worst children you can possibly imagine, so bad that God kills 2 of them. Then forces his daughter-in-law to commit harlotry, to do the thing that he should have done in the first place. And yet, he manages to turn his life around. And so when I can see myself in him, in that I can see my hope, because if he can turn his life around, surely I can turn my life around too. But it gets even better than that, because Judah's story doesn't finish when he comes home. Judah's story finishes standing in front of Joseph, standing in front of a type of Christ. And that becomes really special when you remember that Judah is a type of us and that Joseph is a type of Christ. Because right there you have a type of the judgment And you have a man who'd managed to turn his life around and had stood up, who hadn't been prepared to think of anyone else but himself, and was now prepared to think about others, and was ready to take responsibility for his actions in front of Christ. And he gets forgiven. And just how amazing is that? How amazing and special. And that every time that we look at these passages, we can see ourselves standing in front of Christ and being forgiven. It doesn't get any more special or amazing than that. And it's all there, wrapped up in the lives of these two men, and the life of Judah, and the life of Joseph. Thank you.